Hi, folks. So I'm Kat Gaines, as Mark mentioned earlier. I work at PagerDuty. I've been there for about 11 of their 16 years of existence. So it's a long time sitting in incident response, thinking through what those things mean, and just sitting in the space of incident management and reliability. So that time has just given me a lot of strong perspectives on incident response and team dynamics. And one of the things I'm really excited to talk about today is how we stay effective as leaders during that time. I came to PagerDuty through their technical support organization. I ran that team for a few years, and now I'm running developer relations. So I've also had a lot of hands-on time in incidents thinking about these concepts. And so I want to just share something about myself. I'm a really avid baker and in my spare time. And a few years ago, I was spending time with a friend who I was visiting and decided to just make something for dinner to help just contribute to the household while they were letting me stay there. And my friend came in and said, "Hey, do you want any help in the kitchen?" And I tend to run a little bit short and blunt with my feedback. And so I just said, "No, thanks, please stay out of my way." And I heard from that friend later that I had been a little bit snippy in the kitchen and that she was a little bit hurt by that and felt a little bit just brushed aside. And that feedback really hit home. Nobody really wants to be the snippy friend in their group. So after some reflection, I had a light bulb moment around that. I had some past experiences of being micromanaged in the kitchen, probably by my mom. And those had made those times of cooking with others a little bit stressful, a little bit frustrating. And I think probably all of us, probably a few of you have had experiences either whether it's cooking with friends or family in the kitchen or at work where you've been a little micromanaged or over involved. Can I see a show of hands where you felt like that at some point in your life? A couple. Yeah, a couple folks were like, "Oh my God, yes." So that realization for me really changed how I approach teamwork. It's one of the things that fed into how I approach these things. And it's really relevant to how we handle incident response in our community, actually. So in that reflection, we think about incident response at a couple different ways in PagerDuty. So a couple of ways we define it internally. An incident is something that is an unplanned disruption or degradation of service that is actively affecting someone's ability to use a product or service. A major incident, anything that requires a coordinated response between multiple teams. And incident response itself is an organized approach to addressing and managing an incident. These are just our definitions. So we do publish a lot of best practices documentation that folks can use when they're going over their process internally, whether you're establishing it for the first time, making some edits, or doing a complete overhaul. So I'll just preface this with this is how we define it. Your definitions might look a little bit different. Something that is really important, though, is that you have definitions. And going back to what I was talking about a moment ago, leadership and collaboration, when you're working together with someone, incident response at its core is collaboration. When you're in one of those moments where something's going wrong, the state of incident response can feel really intense. You're dealing with a lot of things happening at once. Something might be broken, and I included a picture of a couple of pies that I made in the past. That one on top has some broken crust. So everyone might be a little bit panicked when that happens. We're all really desperate to return to normal operations. And as leaders, it's really tempting. We feel that responsibility acutely, and our instinct to jump in and just fix everything right away can be overwhelming. That's understandable. We feel that responsibility. We're going to panic a little bit. If everything does fall apart, we're probably one of the people most likely to be held responsible, and we don't really want to see that happen in a negative way. The thing is, though, reacting to that panic for a lot of people sometimes just means taking over and jumping in. If I want it done right, I'll do it myself. If you give in to that reaction, though, you're risking turning your team into people who snip at their coworkers, who feel like you don't trust them because you're micromanaging them. Incident response is a really good opportunity to alienate and upset your team or to build some trust with them. It's your choice. So this is, again, where a lot of leaders fall into the if I want it done right, I'll do it myself trap. In those moments, you have to remember a few things. You hired your team because they're good at what they do, because you trust them, because you want to empower them. And I'm talking about this as though I'm talking to leaders, but if you are struggling with a leader who is trying to work on this themselves, that's something you can remind them of. That person can't be everywhere at once. You also shouldn't try to be. You also don't control, no one does when major incidents strike. You might be in meetings, you might be focusing on other time-sensitive work. No one has the capacity to be a hero, and you really shouldn't try to be. You do have to know when to step in and when to step back. So stepping in can look good when a couple of points here happen. Someone on your team specifically asks you to, they say, hey, I need your help. If you see a major mistake being made, we'll get to that asterisk next to that second bullet point in just a moment. Or if it's called for in your incident response protocol, if you've defined process internally and that says, hey, this is when you should step in, great, go ahead and do it. Stepping back, though, for a leader should happen at pretty much every other time. That list, again, of when you should step in, it's pretty short. The reason for this is that definitions and process do really matter. You can't decide, for example, that something like a misplaced comma is a major mistake during incident response. But it might be really tempting to do so if you had no guardrails around what does and does not constitute a mistake. That sounds like a really trivial example. I've seen it done in incident response before, where it's a status page communication or something like that. That's not something that we need to worry about in that moment. So that's why building that really clearly defined process at your company is super important. If you have a playbook, you can stick to it. If not, anyone can go off the rails and decide new rules that no one else has agreed to, like where they should butt in. The other reason why major mistake, I said I get back to that asterisk, the reason it has that next to it is because even as a leader, correcting that mistake in the moment might not actually be a leader's job. It is an industry standard to appoint an incident commander to run the call once the issue begins. And something that we coach in our team and in our org is that person is the final authority on decisions made during the call. This means that usually the decisions the team is making during incident response are being discussed with that incident commander, who can come from, for us, it's any part of the org. It might be a little bit more limited in other organizations, but whoever that person is, again, they're the authority. Those decisions should be treated as the right ones because they've been made according to the process that everyone agreed on. This level of absolute authority provides clarity during the incident. So it's non-negotiable having that playbook. Otherwise, anyone will make up rules on the fly. Let's talk too about what we call, and this is this quote on the slide here, we call it something funny. We call it the executive swoop and poop internally. That is really what we call it, but it's when someone who is usually a leader or an executive of some kind interrupts an incident call and they start directing action without being asked to. So we give them a one-line solution if you're an incident commander or someone else in the call who feels comfortable saying this. That executive steps in and they say, hey, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And we stop the call, we stop everything, and we say, okay, cool, executive person who joined the call, would you like to take command of the call? That's a scary question. It's simple, but it's pretty effective. And they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to take a step back, realize that they've stepped a little bit out of their responsibility, or they might feel really confident about it and charge in and say, yes, I'm taking command of the call. And then whatever happens, at any point, and either way, clarity is restored at that time. So the point here is that if your team is acting in any incident response role, you have to give them comfort or you have to develop your own comfort, rather, with giving them authority in that role. They're in charge of that role in that moment. A leader doesn't have to get pulled out of boring things like QBR meetings or another budget doc, even if incident response sounds a little bit more exciting, which it often is. But that work they're doing as a leader is already mission critical, and so is the work their team is doing to run the incident. That leader doesn't need the visibility, again, of playing the hero. They already have that prominent voice, so it's their job to empower their team to have that for themselves. So we might be set on the why for staying out of your team's way, but we still need to help them feel empowered to act as that authority and to fend off those leaders who may not be as convinced as you are. So to develop comfort with that, communication is the key piece, and making sure everyone has access to the right communication. I actually have a whole separate talk I give on communication during incidents, so there are some Cliff Notes here really, but I'm happy to point anyone to that later, to recordings or similar if you'd like a deep dive. This right here is PagerDuty's chart of basic roles of incident response. Anyone on any team may be playing any of these roles, but it is critical to have a communications leader liaison. These are the folks in orange here. For external messaging, that person can often come from customer support or other customer-facing roles, but that internal liaison that we see on the left side has to be in place as well. That can really be anyone. They're going to be responsible for managing communication during the incident. So again, they're the authority on what we're communicating, just like the incident commander is the authority on what we're doing and what decisions we're making. That person will talk with the incident commander. The messaging they're putting out will be agreed upon in the call. And one of the most common reasons that leaders pull that old, again, swoop and poop move is, honestly, it can be inflated ego, but another common reason is the thing that I and pretty much everyone I know has, which is a lot of anxiety. They're anxious about the impact on the business, whether it should continue. They're anxious about if it's going to have more impact, about how they might be held responsible, about the public image, about the questions the board is going to ask, and those things are all really fair. They're going to feel it if things go sideways. So something we learn about anxiety, if you experience it, if you know someone who does, is that common anxiety often happens when you can confront it with the facts. So when you have a toolkit and when you have the right communications to remind you of those facts and fill in those gaps in your knowledge, it helps. A crucial piece of that toolkit is stakeholder communications. So again, there's the external piece of communications. We're talking about the internal piece when we talk about stakeholders. Everyone on the leadership team and even everyone in the org should know exactly where to go to get information when something is happening. Simply not knowing what is going on or feeling underinformed is one of the key reasons why executives interrupt incident calls. And it's pretty amazing, actually, how effective just giving them information up front, giving them the right scale of information as well can be. So give them a destination. For us and for a lot of others, it's a Slack channel. It can also be things like an internal status page of some kind. Depending on which tool they're using, there may be features for stakeholder notifications, specifically to keep those folks up to date. But however you do it, you do want to have a defined place to find that information during incidents. Make sure that place exists and that it's widely known. If it's a secret, it's also not going to help anyone. And make sure that you can proactively provide that situational awareness and transparency. No one should feel caught off guard. They should not feel the need in their panic response again to start directing that incident call unless they've actually been asked to. Having that well-defined process during the incident can benefit your organization in a few ways. You get a more consistent understanding of the incident across the organization. There is one story. You get broader real-time awareness of incident impact, so everyone knows in the moment what's happening. It's not outdated information. And again, that one story gives you a more consistent incident narrative, so when you are sharing externally, everyone is saying the same thing. You don't have support and sales saying one thing, or your CTO saying something else, or your communications team saying something different. There is one unified story around what's happening, especially if it gets large and very public. You'll also want to include some key information in these updates. Things like when the incident began, simple enough. What services are impacted, whether they are business impacting, technical, or both. What impact it's having on customers, and I'm just going to say you might not know that right away, and that's okay. Also say we don't know if that's the truth, and once you do, update that communication. And then where to find more information, like a chat channel, a call bridge, anything of that nature. The location of a status page, if there is one, so that people can self-serve those updates. They don't have to come in and poke you for them in the middle of response itself. That's what all of this is actually designed to prevent. How to respond when someone is asking you for more details, especially externally, a customer. So having, again, that consistent narrative across the business. And how often to expect updates. Don't leave them saying, okay, do we have any new updates yet? Do we have more information? Let them know, hey, we're going to update every 20 to 30 minutes or whatever time frame actually works for you, rather than leaving them in the dark. Now, if an incident is severe or if it's long running enough, your communication staff is also likely going to be running, again, those external communications that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Wherever those happen is likely somewhere that you and your teams are already used to looking for information. But even when those external comms are present, it's important to keep the internal ones going. This is where I see people sometimes fall off the wagon a little bit. You do have to keep communicating internally. It serves the function, again, of providing consistency, eliminating any doubt that there might be, maybe there's additional information I don't know that someone isn't communicating because it's not external. Don't let them get that thought in their minds. Make sure they know everything we want to communicate, both externally and internally, that they know where to look, they know who's in charge, and they know that unless they're directly involved in incident resolution in some way, unless they've been asked to, or if it's part of the process, they don't have to jump in. So we've got a few minutes left. We might have a couple minutes for questions, but before we wrap up, just a recap of some do's and don'ts. Saying thank you. I think in my example for me at the beginning, expressing gratitude does help. Empowering your team, using defined process and relying on those clearly defined process and protocol to guide actions and decisions. And then maintaining common authority to provide that information proactively and communicate effectively, making sure, again, that there's that clear and known destination for updates during an incident. Things you want to avoid, obviously, don't micromanage, don't step in unless you have to or unless it's called for. Try not to react hastily to crisis, not letting that anxiety drive you. Try not to neglect that communication, leaving folks in the dark during incidents. Underestimate team capabilities. Try not to doubt their decisions and abilities, especially, again, if they're designated in those specific roles. And then if those pictures at the beginning of baking made you hungry, maybe buy your team some cookies later as well, especially if they're having a stressful moment. I have a couple of things here. I have one more slide after this as well, but these are a couple of resources that go into, this is the quick and dirty version of these concepts that we teach. So these are our operations guides. These are put out by my team. These are much longer, more detailed walkthroughs of how to build process in your org. The QR code on top goes to one of the first of those. And then the other QR code goes to my LinkedIn to connect and chat later. I am trying to be more responsive there than I have been in the past. So if you connect with me there and I'm not responsive right away, I promise I will get back to it. And then this last slide I have, we also love for people to learn from each other in our org. So we have a community of folks who talk about these things, whether you're PagerDuty users or not. This is where folks go to learn from each other, to have discussions about what are you doing? How are you implementing process? It's our community forum. It's also a good place to find events that we're at, where we're speaking, where we're holding user groups and meetups, those types of things as well. So with that, yeah, we've got about 7 minutes left on the timer. So if we have any questions we want to discuss right now, we've got a little bit of time. And if not, we'll give everyone a little bit of time back. I saw one hand here. Yeah,